Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall Podcast. Got a lot to discuss this week. We're still coming off this period where we had that week long, I don't know, train wreck or whatever you want to call it, in the House of Representatives. All the new Congress, kind of new year out of the bat. But now we're starting to get some new stories that are not just George Santos and his latest shenanigans, although that continues to provide us with new stuff. And actually, we'll get to this in a minute, but um, some pretty surprising new stuff that came out last night that we'll briefly get into, where we seem to be finally starting to get into the phase of where I think the real story starts, which is a lot of indictments for like a lot of criminal activity. If you didn't notice, yesterday Santos filed updated FEC reports on his campaign. Where the money came from and stuff like that. And revising those documents is not uncommon. It's actually it happens all the time. And sometimes the FEC can tell a candidate, yeah, hey, this doesn't make sense. Can you provide more information on this? Provide more information on that. It's even the case that sometimes with new politicians, new candidates, the rules aren't, you know, assuming you're not someone who is a future felon, right? Even if you're trying to follow the rules, they're not always that clear and stuff like that. But one of the things that maybe the biggest mystery, kind of at the center of the Santos story, once you get past, not going to colleges he said he went to and not working at places he said he went to, because, you know, there's no there's no law against saying you went to Baruch if you didn't go to Baruch. That's really kind of caveat emptor for voters. In any case, big question is how did Santos go from being a chronic deadbeat who was making $50,000 a year in 2020, which is not a lot of money in New York City, the New York City area, to someone who was making millions of dollars a couple of years later and was making so much money he could contribute upwards of $1 million to his campaign. Okay, so yesterday he files these revised campaign reports, and on the part of the filings where you talk about money you loaned your campaign, there is a thing that says where you check a box, it's my money that I loaned my campaign. Now, you think that would go without saying. If it's not your money, you're not loaning it. So he continued to say that it is that they're loans from him, but suddenly the box isn't checked anymore. So he's loaning his campaign money, but it wasn't actually his money. Now, that's a big no-no. You can't do that. One of the biggest loopholes in the U.S. campaign finance system is that you can donate or loan unlimited amounts of money to your campaign. Most people, what is it? You max out at $5,800 or something like that. If it's you can donate $20 million to your campaign. So obviously it's pretty important if it's your money, because otherwise a couple billionaire friends can just fund your whole campaign directly by, like, oh, I gave Josh $10 million and, oh, Josh decided to donate it to his campaign, all kosher. Okay. So suddenly he seems to be saying maybe it wasn't his money that he loaned himself. Now, everybody's sort of kind of scratching their heads because it's, in a way, it's not terribly surprising that it's not his money, because how could it be his money? How could he be legitimately making that much money out of the blue, but he seems to be admitting to a felony in his revised filings. Um, so there's more life in that story. And again, I think a lot of us have always thought that eventually, you know, who did he, whose credit card did he use without permission in Brazil? Uh, which roommate did he steal a scarf from? All this kind of stuff is great fun, but when you get into financial crimes that the race is joined in a real way. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but we're going to talk about some other things too. We have this finally with the Dobbs report. Supreme Court going to get to the bottom of who leaked that thing. We have the ongoing sort of both sidesing of the Biden classified documents, and then out of the blue, kind of couldn't happen to nicer guys. The new leadership up on Capitol Hill, suddenly Mike Pence turns up with some classified documents. And all of these things are in both the Biden and the Pence cases. I think it's pretty clear that these are inadvertent mishandling of classified documents that I suspect is not. I don't know if it's very common at that level, but it's important to remember that vice presidents, chairman of Senate of intelligence related Senate committees are handling like reports and stuff like that all the time. Who knows exactly what the details are? But both of them, I'm very confident, are pretty dramatically different from the situation with Donald Trump. Having said that, it's sort of immediately upends what was clearly the House Republican plan for the first half of 2023, which was a kind of nonstop fake outrage about Biden and his classified documents. They made a good show of it yesterday. Basically, the head of the oversight committee, the actual oversight committee, not this kind of one-off Tucker Carlson oversight committee they've also set up, but basically said, he lauded Mike Pence for his transparent way of handling the problem, unlike Joe Biden, who basically did everything exactly the same. So anyway, we are going to get into all of those questions. We're also going to talk about, we've gotten the first ratings for the Senate contests in 2024. And as we've known for a while, it's a pretty difficult map for Democrats, to put it mildly. It's not necessarily that there's a lot of races that they're sure to lose in really tough states, but they're on defense basically everywhere. The sort of the best case scenario is that you have something like what happened in 2022, which is that you've got a lot of races that are pretty competitive. And if they all went badly, you could have Republicans really not just take the majority, but take it by, a few seats. So we're going to talk about all of that. But before we get started, let me remind you that the Josh Marshall podcast is brought to you by Grady's Cold Brew Iced Coffee. It's perfect for home, your office, your home office. You just add water and steep for fresh cold brew on demand from your fridge. You hear that? It's your refrigerators congratulating you for making such a good decision. If you're ready to give it a try, you get 25% off at Grady's Cold Brew with promo code TPM. That's Grady's Cold Brew with promo code TPM. So, Kate Riga, what's on our agenda for today?
So let's start by just kind of cleaning up the Dobbs report stuff from last week, because that happened the day after we recorded last week. On Thursday, we got the report from the Marshal of the Supreme Court basically saying we were not able to lock down a suspect. They brought in, outside investigators to help with forensic stuff. They had randomly an old, like, the old DHS secretary, give a thumbs up to the investigation and everything. Um, but the biggest question we were left with, aside from who actually leaked it, was, whether or not the justices were investigated at all in this process, because the report, refers to people as employees, court personnel, terms that, for better or worse, I don't think Supreme Court justices consider themselves employees of any kind.
Yeah, they
Um,
are the court.
Exactly. And then we got a statement the next day from when, I and probably every other reporter, whoever covers the court, called called the court saying, were the justices investigated at all? And then they put out a statement saying the marshal, did interview the justices, made much hay of how cooperative and interested they were, but then says that she didn't have them sign sworn affidavits, promising that they didn't leak it and they didn't know who did. And that's stark because this report was not very long, 20 something pages, and multiple were given to. And by the way, if any of these court employees are found to have lied to our sworn investigators and under oath, here are the various penalties from like the employee handbook level to the criminal penalties that they have exposed themselves to and that they could be prosecuted under. So, it was like this kind of little cover up thing of like, no, 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 we talked to them. But then it's like, and we also didn't use our best tool to ensure that anyone involved here was telling the truth on them.
Wasn't it also the case that they did not even say whether they even asked them if they did it? It was
True.
kind of couched in this sort of like, it was very collaborative. It gave them the opportunity to, the marshal. I mean, it's funny. There actually is like a marshal of the Supreme Court, right? For all these kind of memes about it. Uh,
I was
some,
thinking that too. She was probably like, God damn it, I gotta do something here.
yeah, to kind of, yeah, kind of reclaim the reputation of the
Hmm.
marshal of the Supreme Court. That she got to ask questions, they got to ask questions. And so it's not just that they didn't like, kind of put them under oath or make them sign a sworn statement. It was a little unclear. I mean, you could read it as almost like we're just giving them an update on the investigation. How's it
Hmm.
going? Anything you want to add? And all and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, it was a little it's sort of that thing where kind of like, why are you looking for the keys under the street light? Well, that's the only way, that's the only place there's enough light to see, right? Well, and it's funny. I mean, I do think it's worth noting that government, leaks happen all the time. They happen in Congress, they happen in the executive branch, and there is this as we're as we're talking about in a semi-related way with Biden and Trump and Pence, in the executive branch, there's this separate issue of classified documents where there's actually laws involved, right? You can't publicize this stuff. But the vast majority of leaks are just people talk about things. And there's nothing, there's you can be fired for doing that because obviously um uh every, you know there are very legitimate reasons why people at all levels of government don't want their kind of private decision making to become public. But that's also how we find out about things and find out what's happening in government. And um, there's certainly no legal reason. I'm aware of no laws that prevent anybody from, I don't know, leaking a draft or saying what's going on or whatever, in the Supreme Court. And there's no real reason why it's any different. And certainly, like, if we might think less of a Supreme Court justice who did this, but it's not like who really has any standing to investigate them, frankly. I mean, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court has some, loose, uh, sort of magisterial role running the court. When he's in the majority, he gets to make the decision about who writes the opinion. But the power of the Chief Justice is minimal. It's not like he can, like, if he got mad at Alito, he's like, "I've had it with you, Alito. I'm firing you." You know, they're all constitutional officers, or I guess uh, the 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 Chief Justice is a constitutional officer. But the point is, they're not working for the Chief Justice, and even in a broader sense, who has any standing to investigate them? I mean, the whole thing is kind of weird, and I think that in some ways, what it shows up is that the Supreme Court right now is as dependent as it has ever been on this sense that they have this kind of, you know, Harry Potter hocus pocus that makes them different from the sort of the normal mortals that operate in the Senate and the executive branch. And they have this reasoning that they come up with, and don't ask about it. Don't even talk about it. It's just it's done, right? They're operating under this aura that is what sustains them just kind of changing the laws willy-nilly as they choose, and getting further and further, not just from public opinion, but further and further from the kinds of things like precedent and stuff that have generally uh, given their actions legitimacy. So I really think, and that's kind of the real story here, that their legitimacy, the legitimacy of their making these kinds of decisions and not being scrutinized, that's all under a lot of threat. And so that's kind of where the whole investigation comes from. So the sort of the bogusness of the investigation, I think, is can't be distinguished from the greater kind of crisis of legitimacy that the court has in general.
Yeah, and it's just shot through with this like cult of piety that the Supreme Court justices have engendered from, other people who work at the court and other kind of old DC types. This like pretense that all these people pretend to believe that these people are apolitical, that they are morally upstanding in a way that no one else in government is. It's how you have an investigation into this leak where the obvious benefit is to the conservative justices trying to lock in votes like while this is being circulated. It's just the easiest conclusion to draw, and it's the people who are involved who would be at the least personal risk at leaking the document, and yet they're not even thoroughly investigated at all, if they were investigated at all, which we barely even know. And it's such this really increasingly bizarre disconnect that while we have like Amy Coney Barrett and Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and Alito feeling comfortable going to the Federalist Society and getting a standing ovation for overturning the constitutional right
Like,
to
we delivered
abortion.
for you. Mission
Exactly.
accomplished. Yeah,
And then you
yeah,
have
yeah.
Clarence Thomas, taking pictures with Herschel Walker, not even to mention like all the stuff his wife gets into. And then you have this investigator, shaking down these clerks who are like the top 1% of Yale Law School, who sure as shit don't want to lose this most prestigious job they can get, and being like, "Did you tell your wife about this opinion?" I mean, it's a sham.
Well, it's also, and it's you're alluding to this point, but it's worth drawing out that the it's certainly true. The people who clerk on the Supreme Court have you know, pretty strong opinion. How could they not? They're, kind of either Federalist Society or American Constitution Society people. They've come up through the elite legal academy. Of course, they've got strong opinions, but the uh, what is on the line for them is immense, immense, immense. Not just in a that they probably wouldn't be clerks anymore if they got in trouble for that, and you know if they want to be future judges, if they want to be law professors, but even what many of them go on to do, which is go work at prestigious national law firms and make a ton of money. That, the it is often honored in the breach, but those kinds of, lying, breaking trust, those kind of things really screw you up in a legal career, even though we know that it's not like lawyers never cut corners or never lie about things. So the idea that a clerk is gonna make that move is that's hard to it's hard to believe, because what is on the line for them is immense, immense, and even more for the professional staff, who I would assume are fairly apolitical. They kind of have to be. It just wouldn't be a good job to be in if you're kind of like a hardcore ideologue on one side. Certainly for that. I mean, the most logical thing to me, what was it? There was actually a story about this that came out not too long ago, well after the Dobbs leak and everything. Um, Basically, another case where it was clear that some fairly high profile decision leaked in advance of it coming out on the conservative side.
You're talking
Do,
about Hobby Lobby?
was it? I don't remember whether it was Hobby Lobby. Um,
Because that story was by the Times, uh, like last spring, but it was about the former kind of leader in the anti-abortion movement who has since converted and reformed, and he said that his friend went to dinner with the Alitos and found out about the Hobby Lobby decision weeks before it came out.
right. So okay. So maybe it was. I guess the point is there seems to be um, a decent amount of evidence now that big conservative decisions get aired a bit within the sort of the kind of elite right wing movement in advance of their coming out. I don't know whether we're shocked about this or not. It doesn't shock me tremendously, given how that world works. So it seems to me. I mean, I doubt that Alito gets on the phone with that one political reporter and said, "Hey, I got something for you, man. Meet me at the Starbucks. I'm gonna something you're gonna be interested in." I suspect it is more like that, given that this is the ultimate, Hobby Lobby, whatever. That's fun, but overturning Roe is the big enchilada of all time of the conservative legal movement, and this is when they kind of know it's coming, and the real question was whether, are you really going to overturn it, or are you just going to kind of notch it down almost to non-existence, but still have the idea that you are in the line of Roe jurisprudence. So what seems most likely to me is that Alito, maybe others on, members of the conservative faction on the court, just kind of, showing friends what it looks like, where they're at. And maybe the justice did not think it was going to get leaked to Politico. I can believe that. Um, but because I'm not sure that that's necessary for what they're wanting to do, right? I mean, there's an argument that you just want to make clear within the movement, kind of like, this is what's on offer. So if anybody wants to make clear to like Kavanaugh that
Mhm.
getting going soft is not okay. In any case, so Alito, one of the other conservatives, kind of puts it into that world, and someone in that world decides, you know what, I'm not leaving anything to chance. I want this to get out there. That seems plausible. That seems plausible to me. I mean, again, I just don't think it just. I mean, I'm frequently naive, but I just have a hard time believing that like a justice directly does that. Why would they? They don't need to do that.
Right.
Ah, a guest appearance.
she's
Excellent.
she's being a beast.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of leaks, well, speaking of insecure documents,
Yeah.
so we find out that last week a lawyer found about a dozen classified documents at Pence's Indiana home. It's kind of he asked the lawyer who has experience with classified documents to look through his stuff after the Biden revelations. They put everything in a safe. FBI comes and picks it up. National Archives have it. Um, and like you say, kind of the most interesting piece of this, to me, this is what I've been wondering since the Biden thing came out, which is like if you searched the homes of Obama and Al Gore and Cheney and Bush, like, would you probably find these documents in all of them? Is this just kind of the deal that when you vacate the presidency, you just take boxes of junk and you never really look at it again? And because these people tend to live in big homes, they don't come across them until something like this happens.
It's a funny thing because I was thinking about this, and I was going to say it's because I'm a writer and many writers do this, but maybe it's just because I have an ego and many people with egos do this. I have boxes of my papers going back many years. They're basically just my notes, right?
Mhm.
Kind of. And but it's not like I assume it is when you talk about taking hundreds of boxes, but there's boxes of folders basically that I have. And when they talk about like a 13-hour search, even for the relatively few boxes of file folders that I have, going through page by page, that will take a long time, a really long time. So I'm sort of surprised at, like, with the Biden thing, they said they looked through his home, right? 13 hours. And they're looking at memorabilia, they're looking at personal notes. I mean, this doesn't have a huge amount of news relevance, but uh, they're talking about a lot of stuff. It would I wonder what the process is. Do you just kind of, oh, no, 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 I didn't really see any classified. Are you looking for document by document? Because like when you're I mean, and there's a whole separate question of when you leave the vice presidency, you don't just take all your work product. Most of that is government, is owned by the government, regardless of whether it's classified. They're just government records, that which is a whole separate thing. Um, and so a lot of it just goes to the National Archives because it's the records of the history of the United States government. So I don't know. So there's a whole separate question of what do you get to keep as just your personal stuff as opposed to the government stuff, set apart from the classified stuff. But I would imagine there's that it's not uncommon. I mean, it would be helpful to get a sense both with Biden and with Pence. And remember, with Biden, he was a senator for like 35 years. And a lot of that time, I think he was Judiciary Committee, but I think he was also Foreign Relations for a significant period of time. Obviously, you're looking at a lot of classified stuff if you're on a kind of a national security um, type committee. So it would be helpful to get a sense of like, are we talking about there were 100,000 documents and they found 6 or 7 that were classified, or like 50 documents. I mean, it's definitely not 50 documents, but it would it would be helpful to get a sense of that. And the other thing I think is that at that level, we know there's a whole ongoing thing about overclassification of documents. I think it's important not to conflate these things because these are the rules we operate by. And you can't say that whenever you screw up and you're like, well, we're classifying too much stuff anyway. Um, but I think a lot of stuff at the presidential level, vice presidential level, are basically like briefing papers. Here's what we think is going on in North Korea. Here's what we think about this. Here's what we think about that. Those are generally classified. Doesn't seem surprising to me that a few of those get filed in with with other stuff. I will say this, and I'm gonna do something about this on the blog. I said in a post yesterday that we assumed that all of Biden's documents, which seem to be in the neighborhood of like a couple dozen documents altogether, that I said I assumed they were all in the confidential echelon, which is the lowest level. Apparently, there's a CNN report from a few weeks ago that a few of those are SCI documents, which are the high level ones, the things that are very, the kind of top secret and stuff like that. So it's not all black and white um, uh, between Biden and Trump on that line, although there's countless other uh, differences, not least of which is it seems pretty clear to me that the Biden stuff is inadvertent and you shouldn't be sloppy and whatever. But there's a world of difference between finding something, immediately reporting yourself, and handing everything over versus what Trump did. I do think it is. It seems very clear that, like, why was Pence having a lawyer go through all this stuff? Obviously, because of the Trump thing, right? So we're kind of getting everybody doing this uh, because of Trump. So I suspect. I mean, I think we have decent evidence that it's not terribly uncommon, and that's probably not a honestly probably not a huge crisis. What's a huge crisis is when a president just kind of takes all of it and says it's his and refuses to give it back and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, part of this I think is like the phrase classified documents is so entrancing to those of us who are not really on the inside of that world because it sounds like remember the famous picture of Obama and Hillary Clinton, while they were getting Osama bin Laden, while they're sitting in the room and the tension is radiating. And if you remember, Hillary Clinton has some papers in front of her that weren't like blurred out in the original, and that was kind of a kerfuffle. But it,
Right.
it almost feels like that's what we think of when we think of these things. You're thinking like maps of nuclear facilities or, kind of like exciting, sexy stuff like that. And obviously some of it is that, and we don't know, we just don't know what's in these papers. But my boyfriend used to be in the army, and he was telling me, just kind of, he mentioned it offhand one time, that he had secret clearance while he was in there, and I was like, oh my god, that's
Ooh.
so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
And then I was just like asking him more about it, and it was kind of like, it wasn't that hard to get. And I was like, oh well, did you want to get top secret, the next level up? And he was just kind of like, it's kind of, you gotta do work, and like what would be the point of it? I didn't use it that much in my day to day because he wasn't in intel, but like I do think that some piece of the momentum of these stories is just that we as laymen don't have a good grasp of everything that falls under the classified echelon. And so it does make these stories seem kind of more thrilling when there's a big possibility that we're talking about the classified thing being like a schedule, or, something that ends up being kind of more mundane.
Well, I think it's even likely that again you get there's a kind of a rising tensions between Pakistan and India, something that
Mhm.
happens with some regularity, and the top people are trying to figure out what to do. and you get briefing papers that says, well, the current head of the Pakistani government, we think this about them. There's this thing, there's this with the Indians, he knows this person and that person, and this is all based on what the US intelligence world comes up with. Probably a lot of it is not that different from what you'd get if you just kind of read up
Mhm.
in public. Um, but obviously the US government, that's their information. They don't want it circulated. So it's classified. It's like confidential. And then you have, and you know, if a few of those pages end up in the kind of in 50 boxes in Mike Pence's house, I also wonder kind of like you do have to have a big house,
Mhm.
right? Because just recently, we live in, like everybody who lives in an apartment in New York City, a small apartment, and I'm always trying to like, okay, where can I put this? Not like my boxes of documents, just like where can I put the extra paper towels, right? Like, wow, like where do you put the 50 boxes in your in your house?
Solution to this problem is
Yeah, yeah,
making ex-presidents and vice presidents live in apartments in big cities in America.
yeah. So you just
Telling you
can't.
there'd be no documents held
Yeah,
on
no,
to.
no documents at all. Um, But then other stuff is like, uh, you know, here's the report from our guy Fred, who works for the Indian prime
Right.
minister, and he's our spy.
Mhm.
That's pretty delicate stuff because Fred would be in a heap of trouble if it got out that he works for the CIA. So it runs this gamut, and you know it it it's hard to know in many ways. It is a lot of this is replay of the Hillary email stuff.
Mhm.
And it's basically nonsense. But the Trump thing is a world of difference, and that's just obvious. But again, for our current thing, the key is that it 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 just takes from the House Republicans. This thing they were going to ride like one of those waves you see out off either the videos, waves in Hawaii or off the coast of Portugal, where it's like 100 feet tall and you're just riding that stuff for 20 minutes or something like that. This was going to be their thing, and now Pence kind of like rained on the party, and in this limited situational sense, couldn't have happened to nicer guys. And I don't mean Pence. I don't think Pence's grave sin is enabling people like Trump, but I don't think he's a Trump himself. I don't think he goes for this kind of stuff, kind of taking stealing the gold encrusted lozenges that the head of North Korea gave me as a gift when I hung out with him in Singapore or whatever. I don't think that's his. I don't think that's his deal.
And the other part of the dynamic is, I think you wrote about this, Josh, but the way that, the usual suspects have decided to glom on to the Biden thing and pretend like everyone's too stupid to see the difference between that and Trump. And, it's been a while since there's been kind of a scandal you can hang around Biden's neck. So, this one seems like it'll do. Um, and that becomes more difficult too, because before you could write a story that's like, obviously Trump's was worse, but Biden's is not good. This is irresponsible. This is not befitting of a president. Could pull a Dick Durbin and say his stature is reduced. But Pence's situation is basically exactly the same. I mean, I'm already trying to think of how House Republicans are going to try to differentiate the Biden situation, and they'll probably say it came out more in like drips and drabs and it was in multiple locations or something dumb like that to try to make it seem
Well, I think their
like
I
in a
think their
different world.
main I think their main thing is that both Pence and Biden immediately called up the National Archives, or
Right.
I guess I'm not sure if you call National Archives first or DOJ first. Say, hey, we found these. Can you come and get them? First thing out of the thing. The Biden people didn't announce it publicly for several weeks.
Mhm.
Okay, that's it's really not much to hang a big a big difference on. So,
Right. And I
yeah.
don't think we're still fully clear with the Biden situation why everything was done in pieces like this. Um, like we know that at first they thought they were only documents at the office, right? And then they realized like, oh, maybe we should search the home. But then it seems like there were one or two more home searches that did turn additional stuff up after the initial one.
Well, I think my understanding of this, at least, okay, initially they were moving this Biden Penn
Right.
Center, this little kind of, bespoke think tank that he used as his perch between the vice
Mhm.
presidency and becoming president. That was like closing down or being phased out. So there's moving the stuff, and they're moving the stuff, and they find this. That they tell the DOJ that kind of moves that. So I think on their own they said, okay, let's look through the stuff at his home just to make sure that there's not more. They're looking through, and they do find a couple things, and they stop and they say, okay, you know, we found some stuff. We want you to come and get it. At the same time, this has, I think that may have been when Merrick Garland said, okay, we're not just doing a kind of an internal review. I need to give this to a special counsel because I'm Merrick Garland. I'm going to give it to a Trump U.S. attorney. Like, okay, because everybody who investigates things has to be a Republican. We know this is the rule. And then the uh the Biden people say, hey, it was our idea to search, to go to the FBI. Why don't you search the whole house? Just head to toe, look through everything. I think it was clearly voluntary, and I think they did suggest it. I think a more cynical view might say, like, they're doing an investigation. They're probably going to ask at some point. So why not be proactive and kind of say that you volunteered it? But I think that's the sort of the chain of events. And if you see, there's in the White House press briefings over the last several days, the Bidens have a little vacation, a beach house in Rehoboth. So now they're saying, "What about Rehoboth?" And kind of, so uh, I'm sure they'll. I mean, I would kind of wonder, like Rehoboth, where you got it with the surfboard. I mean, why, why would you have any documents in Rehoboth? But who knows? But I think that is the progression of events, and I think the Biden people were, hey, we just found some documents, we're turning them over. That's kind of no harm, no foul, and kind of realizing, like, okay, this is becoming an issue, so now we need to, have you come and do a search. And I assume, um part of the logic of inviting them to do that, kind of full soup to nut search of the of his home is sort of like, if they're doing it themselves or if it's partial, like, let's just get the home out of the way. Like, presumably the home part of this is done now. The FBI guys, got to go to their heart's content. This is what they came up with. So, we've kind of we've settled that out. And it is kind of Hillary's emails
I
all
wonder
over
if they'll
again.
be clamoring for Pence to be special counseled now or special investigated.
Well, did you see that I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the argument for not doing it is. I mean, frankly, I think it was a mistake to appoint a special counsel for Biden, because I think there's, at least based on what we know, there's really no evidence that there is a there. You get into this kind of circular argument of, well, how are people going to trust there's no there unless you appoint a special counsel, which obviously elevates it, and
Mhm.
all that kind of stuff. You see all this kind of tut-tutting from the Dick Durbins and the you know, the editorialists who you would expect it from, and you have from a lot of journalists, because the Trump era put a certain kind of elite MSM journalist under a lot of pressure, because you've got one guy doing tons of crazy shit. And that kind of forces you at some level to be saying, wow, president's breaking a lot of laws right and left. And the fact that you're saying that a lot more about one side than the other side creates a kind of, a both sides as osmotic crisis, right? We
Mhm.
need to come up with something, and so when something that kind of gets into the ballpark, you really go to town over it. But
Yeah, I mean, I guess the
such is
real
life.
question is which ex-president or VP are we gonna hear from next who found documents? And I will say this, if anyone tries to disturb Jimmy Carter's peace, I'm gonna have something to say about it. So,
Yeah, no, it is. Well, it's a whole. I mean, it is completely inconsequential to this story, but I am kind of curious what each guy. It is each guy so far. Harris is still the VP, so it's not relevant for her yet. What you decide to put in boxes in your house, set aside classified, but the idea is that your papers are the US government's. And I guess, what is it? Oh, another thing that came up is Biden's papers from his Senate days were donated to the University of Delaware,
hmm,
right? So that's where his papers will be. I guess for senators, it's not the National Archives, that's presidency, blah, 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 blah. So, like, what about there? And whose fault would that be? The University of Delaware is going to be in trouble now. Anyway,
oh my god.
there we go.
All right, before we wrap, let's talk about these new projections. We got them from uh, Crystal Ball at University of Virginia, and then Cook Political Report. Which I'm sure listeners know are kind of specialized in doing this. These big projections. They're not pollsters, but they do a lot of this kind of zoomed out. Here's the Senate landscape. Here's the House landscape. Here's the governor's landscape. And so we got kind of their first cut on 2024 in the Senate and for gubernatorial races. And Josh and I were, we were looking at these right before we started recording. And what I think was interesting is like right now, in terms of the Senate, the common wisdom, the kind of everybody's line is really hard map for Democrats. You got West Virginia to defend, Montana, Ohio, in addition to kind of the usual suspects of the battleground swingy states. While the hardest seat Republicans have to defend is Rick Scott's in Florida. Kind of a bummer for Democrats.
And
But
arguably Ted Cruz in Texas.
that's your one of
It was,
those.
yeah,
Let
it was. I mean, he wasn't. What was the final for him in 2018?
me see.
Like, he didn't. I mean, he obviously won. He didn't win
Mhm.
by a lot. I think he won by what, 3 or 4 points.
2.6%.
Okay. I mean, he's and
It's
and that
it's
was in 2018.
yeah,
So basically, a pretty killer year
right.
for Democrats, although it didn't really help them much in the Senate. So there's always hope with Ted. But yeah, it's not like you have like what you had in 2022 with Pennsylvania, where you say, okay, retiring Republican, that's basically a Democratic state, not a blue state, purple state, but I mean it sends Democratic senators. It's had a string of Democratic governors. So you don't have anything like that. You have some sort of like reaches that maybe you could pick up, and then you've got 3 seats maybe that are like a challenge,
Mhm.
and then a lot of seats that could go badly in a bad year.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. And so what I thought was interesting is these two places were very similar. A lot of almost all their ratings were the same. Where they diverged is that Cook was more bullish for Democrats on West Virginia and Montana. And that's obviously Joe Manchin and John Tester, neither of whom have officially announced that they're running again. And I do think these ratings are pretty predicated on them running again. Because, I mean, if Joe Manchin doesn't run in West Virginia, Republicans are going to get that seat. Same with John Tester. All of this kind of depends on having these uh, incumbents who have proven that they can operate and win as Democrats in hugely red states running again. And then the other difference was that actually the crystal ball was a bit more bullish on Pennsylvania, put that in the likely Democratic category versus Cook putting it in leans Democrat. Um, but otherwise, pretty similar. Like they're putting Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada all leaning Democratic to begin with. They got Ohio, Sherrod Brown as a toss up. They have Arizona as a toss up, obviously, thanks to what looks like, if Cinema runs, will be a three-way race between her, Ruben Gallego, who formally announced on Monday, and whoever the Republican is. But I think, an interesting theme that kind of ran throughout these analyses was that so much of it is going to come down to Republican candidate quality, the same way that we saw this cycle. That, like Arizona is a winnable seat for Republicans, but not if you run Blake Masters, right? And the thing is, like, I got through reading these and I was like, well, obviously that's a problem they're going to fix, right? Because it's pretty much everyone attributes it to being the biggest reason why they didn't win the Senate this year. But then you have the problem of part of the right wing lurch of the Republican Party is that you've got to get someone nutso enough that they can win a Republican primary, and then who's able to either relocate to the center or rebrand or somehow recharacterize themselves enough that you can win a general election in these like purpley states. And that is proving pretty difficult to achieve.
And I would say in the lesson of certainly of 2022, arguably 2020, is there's not a lot of attempt to reposition.
Right.
It's not like Blake Masters was like moving to the center. I mean, I guess you can say he sort of, pulled some abortion stuff down off his site, but basically they're trying to run as Blake Masters. And the other side of this though is that Mark Kelly and Kirsten Sinema both beat what is her name? They both beat the same candidate, the woman who
Oh,
was the Air
McSally.
Force. Yeah, didn't they both beat McSally in successive? I think I have that
I think
right.
that's right. I think
Yeah,
that's right.
2018 she was appointed. Blah
Mhm.
blah blah
Right.
blah. Yeah, she lost. Then she was appointed, and then Mark Kelly ran against her, and she
Right.
lost again. And she was the sort of first tier candidate that the national committee is going to want to run. She's a woman, she's a veteran, she's pretty conservative, but she's not doing big lie stuff, and she
Mhm.
lost twice.
Right.
So, and the other thing, and it kind of goes without saying, but we sort of lose some sense of it in our kind of hyper polarized era, that it really depends what's happening in 2024,
Mhm.
right? I mean, if if it's a bad year for Democrats, they could lose 5 or 6 seats. And if it's a bad year for Republicans, they could have what basically happened in 2022, that you roll up all those close run seats.
Right.
Um and you probably have um just because they're human, they're really good, but they're still human. You probably have the prognosticators at Center for Politics and Cook reacting to 2022.
Mhm.
You know, the Democrats kind of turn out to pull some of these out. And one thing, just one more point on this. One thing about the Montana race is that one of the holdouts, and is it Rossendale? I can't remember. I'm forgetting
M
the guy's name.
Matt Rosendale, right?
Yeah, Matt
Mhm.
Rosendale, in the
Who
House,
ran against Hester before.
ran against Tester before, is seen generally as, in the bad candidate mold,
Mhm.
um, by the national committees and stuff like that. He was clearly pushing hard on the anti-McCarthy, kind of put all of that kind of stuff to gain the non-Rhino right-wing cred, because the idea is he wants to run for the Senate seat again. Um, and so maybe he'll get it. And I have no idea what's going on in John Tester's life, but I'd be surprised if he doesn't run.
Me too.
Manchin is another story.
Mhm.
No idea there. And that's kind of worrisome. I mean, if Tester doesn't run, it's pretty bad news for Democrats. Not as bad news as Manchin not running, though.
Yeah.
Montana has never been as wildly pro-Trump as West Virginia is, and I think in the uh, Kyle at Center Four
Mm.
was saying that it's presidential year. Last time Manchin ran, it was in 2018. Strong Democratic year, not a presidential year. If you have Trump on the ballot and Trump is winning uh, West Virginia by like 40 points, is he going to be able to get that much crossover?
Right.
That's tough. That's tough.
Yeah, and it also will come down to who they run in West Virginia, right? And I think what is a little worrying there is Jim Justice as the governor, who's pretty popular. He's term limited, so
Also a former Democrat.
I didn't know that. But so there's
I'm pretty. We'll for our listeners, we'll check that. I'm pretty
Mhm.
certain that's the case. I think he was actually originally elected as a Democrat
Mm,
to the governorship. Um, but that kind of that's important because, notwithstanding being a Republican now, he comes out of that kind of good old boy, bring in the federal spending kind of mold that you know Bob Byrd was that thing. Joe Manchin kind of still benefits from that. So it's not like he's some kind of like wild Trumper that maybe you could, notwithstanding the Trump stuff, you could work on that in a bad candidate way. I have, no idea.
yeah, so but they're thinking he might run. The only thing we know for sure about Manchin is that he said he doesn't wanna run for governor. So, for him, it seems like it's kind of either Senate
Up or
or
out.
he's out of politics.
Did I see something where people were talking about him running for president? I
Oh
I
my
don't
god.
I don't think that was more than a lot of times stories like that get generated because someone says, "Hey, let's ask him if he wants to run for president,"
Right.
and he says something like, "Well, I'm not making
Right, 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 right.
not taking anything off the table," and suddenly like, "Hey, you might run for president," but who knows? I think that I think Joe Manchin has really enjoyed the last few years
Mhm.
in which he is the toast of everything and all that kind of stuff, and he's constantly on the shows and blah 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 blah. So I don't think he wants to run and lose. So I'm pretty sure he'll run if he thinks he's got a solid shot.
Right.
Like, I don't think he's just gonna retire because he's like done.
Yeah. And I think in terms of candidate quality elsewhere, probably, I mean, the race to watch has got to be Arizona, right? Because we already have cinema potentially playing spoiler, but Arizona is also just has such a rich history of producing absolute wingnut Republicans. And we know that Blake Masters is considering running again. It's like pretty obvious that Carrie Lake is going to at least heavily consider running there. And
Well,
if they
she may, but I wonder, will she be able to justify when she's already governor? You can't hold two offices at one time, right?
Yeah, and is also campaigning to be Trump's VP pick. So she's got a lot on her plate. But
Yeah.
if they get someone like that, I mean, again, Cinema is the X factor who very well could play spoiler to Gallego, but that's just still much easier climb than if they get somebody sane in that seat who could be attractive to someone who, doesn't dig the kind of democratic infighting that's going to happen on the other side.
Or doesn't dig, I think another question with Gallego,
Hmm.
he is he's pretty progressive. He
Yeah.
he he represents an extremely blue district. Um, he is clearly, wisely presenting himself, introducing himself as a guy who grew up in very poor circumstances, I believe, with a single mother.
Yeah.
He served in the army. I'm not sure if it was the army or the
Marines.
Marines.
Hmm.
Marines. That thing. But he's not Mark Kelly or Kirsten Sinema, or at least not Kirsten Sinema 5.0, whatever kind of version of herself that she's at running as now. One thing I will mention, I think it's important for listeners to keep an eye on. There was a lot of reporters were asking Senate Democrats this week, who are you going to support? Are you going to
Mm,
support the Democrat? Or are you going to support your colleague Kirsten? And one question is, who's the National Committee going to support? The
right.
Democratic Senate Committee. Now, this gets a little complicated because it is pretty galling to hear that the incumbent senators might be uh, supporting Sinema. But remember, she's still caucusing with the Democrats.
Yeah.
And that is what they do with Bernie. That's what they do with Angus King. In those cases, there's sort of everybody knows in Vermont, in Maine, those people are gonna be functional Democrats. So the
Hmm.
Democrats don't even
Right.
field a candidate. They clearly are fielding a candidate now, and it's a
Hmm.
very different thing. But you know, they've got a year and a half to deal with. They don't want to have her caucus with the Republicans or make more trouble for them. And we also have the Senate brain issue.
Right.
She's their friend, or at
Hmm.
least she's a colleague they have to get along with. But the thing that really jumped out at me, what all of them said is, we don't want to get ahead of her. We don't even know if she's running yet. That was very interesting to me, because they seem to all, when they say don't get ahead of, if you're running, what is there to get ahead of? Are you supporting me or you're not? So that made me wonder even more than I have already been wondering, which is a lot, whether she's even going to run. Um, and again, go back and look at it was like an Axios or Semaphore or one of the newsletters, getting into this, um, what they were going to do, and they were all kind of like, we don't want to get ahead of what she's going to decide. Give it time, blah 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 blah. So I think a lot of them are kind of thinking she's not going to run. So let's not get into this now, because the problem may solve itself.
Right.
And I do wonder whether she will run, because who knows who the Republic. I mean, if the Republicans are lucky, they'll get like Doug Ducey,
Hmm.
who's popular, two-term governor, ended uh, uh, ended his tenure, still fairly popular. He's at least given signals that he's not interested, but who knows? Who knows what's going to happen there? But it really seems to me, given how much she has damaged herself, that the polls are going to have, maybe the Republican a little ahead of Gallego, but like Kirsten Sinema down at 10%. And like, do you really want to end your Senate career like that? Like, not just losing for reelection, but being like a third party candidate who, I wonder.
I've been thinking about this too because this primary for Arizona Senate is not until August 2024. That is so far away. And obviously, here Gallego made his move early to clear the field to make himself the kind of the Democratic candidate,
Yeah.
the way to weed out other serious Democrats who might be interested. But you're right. I mean, this is something I've been thinking about a lot. What does the national party do here? Because like you say, you don't want to piss Cinema off and have her kind of pettily say, well, fine, I'm going to go hang with the Democrat or with the Republicans for the rest of my term then. And do they do the whole, well, we don't get involved in primaries? But the thing is, like, she's not a
It's not a
Democrat.
primary.
It's
Yeah.
not her party,
Yeah. Yeah.
like that, the kind of go to things there. And like you say, obviously, they kind of make exceptions for Bernie and Angus King and people who act like normal Democrats. But she's not a Democrat, and there is a real Democrat running. So it puts them in a bind, if
Yeah.
she does decide to run.
It's not going to be sustainable for the party committee to support her. They're not going to be able to support her.
Right.
It just because there's going to be a Democratic primary. The state Democratic Party is not happy with her at all.
Mhm.
So the idea that they're going to hold a primary and have a nominee, and the national party isn't going to support, that is not going to happen. The question is like how heavily they get involved, and then also critically how the individual senators act. Are they going to raise money for a Gallego? And just at a basic level, are they going to get behind him and endorse him?
Mhm.
I think in practice, given given everything that has happened over the last couple years, they will have to get behind Gallego, and there will be questions about, are they giving him 70% or
Mhm.
100%? But this isn't a the obvious precedent for this is what happened with Joe Lieberman back in I can't remember if it was 2006 or 2004. But when he ran it as independent, won, blah 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 blah. That was a very very different time, very different set of circumstances, different era, blah 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 blah. But there's a lot of you know, this isn't like AOC running against Chuck Schumer, where you say kind of like, "Hey, we've got a senator.
Mhm.
Don't do this. This is just because you can win a primary doesn't mean you kind of upset the apple cart." This is someone who has totally trashed her support among Democrats um, in the state, and you risk um, you risk inviting just all sorts of national intra-democratic bad mojo if you've got this and that senator saying, yeah, no, I'm not supporting the Democratic nominee. I'm
Right.
supporting this independent who actually kind of screwed us over a lot.
Right. Yeah, so I want to briefly mention some of the other races on this list. Ohio is going to be one of the most scrutinized, where Sherrod Brown has almost become something of a phenomenon within Democrats, that he is has been able to win and win fairly easily, even as the state becomes kind of much redder with every election cycle. And I think especially this year, because we just came off the midterms where Tim Ryan was, by all accounts, a pretty as good a candidate as Democrats could have fielded there. I think he ran a really good campaign, and he lost by kind of a lot. He lost by
Yeah.
the same amount that Biden lost the state in 2020. So it's an unavoidable reality that that state has become much redder than even a few cycles ago, when it was mentioned in the same breath as the other swingy battleground states.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be another place where candidate quality matters an awful lot, because if Republicans run a dud, Sherrod Brown has shown that his kind of economic populist thing is popular, has crossover appeal. He's an incumbent, a longtime incumbent, so he's a formidable force. And he, again, it feels like that, he's the best person that Democrats could possibly run in the state.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of his, and I've met him a couple times. Uh, I think he's. But what was the margin in 2018? How much did he win by in 2018?
Let me see.
Like he won by a solid, but not overwhelming. I mean, the contrary argument is it was a strong Democratic year. Now, Claire McCaskill went down. Wait, what was it?
He got 53.4 to the Republicans 46.6.
Okay, so
I mean,
not a
that's very
blowout,
decent.
but a solid win.
Yeah.
In what is always going to be a kind of a close run
Mhm.
state. I mean, it sounds like he did almost as well as Vance did. Kind of. So what is it? If it was Vance ended up being wasn't 45-55. It was something like 53-47, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
I thought
In
it
that
was like
category.
an 8-point spread or so.
Yeah, so maybe a little better. So the pessimistic, I think, interpretation of that is 6 years ago, things keep changing in Ohio. Um, and he had incumbency and he had all the anti-Trump stuff. So, we sort of we don't know how strong Sherrod Brown is going to be in that state. I do think he has, um, he has a politics that is about as good a politics as you can have for a Democrat in that state. And trying to remember, they ran that little goober guy who's run for like 20 different things. What's his name again?
You're
The
talking
guy,
about it was the state level lawmaker, right? Um,
oh no,
you're
the
talking
guy.
about the against Brown,
Yeah, wasn't it the guy who's a was it
Jim
Chinese? What?
Renacci.
No, it's well, maybe he was the candidate, but there's this other guy. A perennial losing candidate who keeps being run for things. Josh Mandel.
Mm,
I, th- maybe he ran. Maybe they ran Mandel against him 12 years ago. I
okay.
can't remember. But who knows? That's going to be anything in Ohio is going to be a tough, a, a, a tough thing. And we've also seen that these different states operate differently, that you have that there's a decent chance John Tester wins in Montana, even though that is a solidly red state.
Hmm.
Missouri, Claire McCaskill lost in Missouri. And I don't think people are even talking really about Josh Hawley having much of a problem there. So you've got those kind of border state. Ohio is not a border state in the sense that Missouri is a border state. Obviously, these labels are pretty
Hmm.
long in the tooth. We're talking about something that happened 150 years ago, but there's some. There's still a in both of those states. There is a significant portion of the state that is culturally part of the American South, and that makes a big difference. And
Hmm.
that distinguishes them from Pennsylvania, Michigan. Even though the cliche is that what is it? Everything between Pittsburgh and Philadelphia
Yeah.
is like Alabama, but
Right.
still, it's a little different.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Totally. And then in those the ones you were just mentioning, kind of in Pennsylvania, you've got Bob Casey running, which I think kind of contributes to people being a bit more bullish, as just,
yeah,
he's from a, a very long, proud family name tradition in the state. He's like kind of the nicest, most mild mannered senator. I mean, he's been doing it for a while. He did say recently that he got a diagnosis of prostate cancer, So that is a factor. But when he announced it, he basically said, outlook is very good. Not too concerned, getting good treatment kind of thing. So if he runs,
Right.
that one seems that's going to be a big climb for Republicans, I think. And then in Nevada, you have Jackie Rosen running again. But, it's kind of a solid, you know, I don't mean it this derogatively, but like backbencher Democratic senators kind
Kind
of
of
who aren't the
machine politician.
splashiest. Right.
Yeah, kind of a machine, not in a sense of corruption, but someone who's come up through that, democratic machine that Harry Reid built
Hmm.
in Nevada. And um I don't know, stepping on eggshells here, but that tends to, in some states you have people who sort of come out of the blue. Maybe they're businessmen who are self-funding
Hmm.
or kind of come in with their own brand. These are not like that. These are people who have been part of a movement in Nevada over the last 25 years that has changed what was once a very Republican state to one that is now not a not a very democratic state, but ends up consistently being a democratic state, albeit by narrowish margins.
Hmm.
So yeah, they're kind of similar in that sense. And in Nevada, you have that weird thing where it's all kind of about, can the Democrats get enough people to show up in Las Vegas that it overwhelms the militia folks in the rest of the state. And I know I'm,
Yeah.
I know I'm going to get in trouble. And there's other parts of there's other urban areas in Nevada besides Las Vegas. But you're talking to someone whose school went on a ton of field trips in rural Nevada, um, in the 1980s. And like, 1980s is a while ago, but not that while ago for rural Nevada. It's Idaho, it's Idaho plus outside of those, outside of those areas. So yeah, I think it's similar to that
Right.
race.
And then the last in that batch is Michigan, which Debbie Stabenow is not running for reelection there. So, it will be an open seat. Um, but it just strikes me as in all kind of the quote unquote battleground states that Democrats would probably feel most comfortable where they have to field a new candidate and not an incumbent, it would probably be Michigan. Because I mean, that of the holy trinity of kind of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, I think Michigan has been the most kind of reliably across the board blue of those in the recent cycles. And also Michigan is just kind of bursting with young female talent in particular. Their state legislature has become super female this last election. They've got female governor, female AG, female secretary of state. There's just like a lot of
And they also
young.
control the state legislature for the first
Exactly.
time in like a quarter century.
Right.
And I believe it's Alyssa Slotkin,
Mhm.
who is now, I think, in her third term in the House. The people I know who are kind of pretty wired in Michigan politics basically say like it's her. It's gonna be her. And the thing that makes her a particularly attractive candidate, I think, is that she's in a swing district. She's not in some, I mean, even this year she was one of the endangered,
Mhm.
perceived as one of the endangered people, even though I think she won, relatively handily. So what she brings to the table is saying, I'm not someone who's just been like killing it in a blue district. I've been kind of operating in the statewide climate, and she can say that she has now won. I'm pretty sure it's three times, 18, 20, and 22 that she's run. Three totally different political environments. 18, Democratic wave year; 20, the COVID year, presidential year, all the different stuff. And then 2022, what seemed to be a kind of was supposed to be a wave year for Republicans, and she held on. So I think they've got a pretty good person. I kind of assume that guy who they've had running is James. I can't I'm spacing on his name. Um, who they've had African American
John
Republican
James, right?
John James, who they've had running for office, who's run for like 10 things over the last few years, but he finally just won a House seat.
Yep.
So that they clearly see him as a dynamite candidate. So we'll see.
Which
We'll
is
see what
funny because
happens
he's
there.
lost to both Debbie Stabenow and Gary Peters. So I mean,
Yeah, I mean it's it's it does cut both ways.
right.
He's lost. He is. It will be his third. I'm sure other candidates who want to run for that seat will say like, do we need to give you a third shot
Right.
at losing in the Senate? He's kind of like that Josh Mandel guy in Ohio. So
Yeah. So that's, we're talking what a year in advance, but that's what the landscape looks like now. And I think, as we've been talking, kind of our big themes are who are Republicans going to run against this like almost completely slate of Democratic incumbents, and then really, unfortunately, the same people we've been talking about for the past freaking 2 years. It's going to be a DeCinema run, does Manchin run, and a lot is going to kind of shake out in accordance with who gets these slots and who ends up running.
yeah, and again, it's people understandably kind of think of those two as peas in a pod, saying kind of just two sides of the same coin. And however, in this case, you really don't want her to run, and you really want Joe Manchin to run.
Right.
You want to be sending all of your checks to Joe Manchin because Joe Manchin doesn't run. You basically bake in a lost Senate seat just from the get-go,
In
and
perpetuity, probably.
yeah, and in perpetuity. So you really do want him to run, and obviously you got a 51 seat majority. You've got to run the table everywhere. So yeah, go Joe Manchin, everybody's favorite
It's what we've
Democratic
been
senator.
saying all along.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so is that all we
Yep,
got for today?
that's what we
All
got.
right. Well, let me remind you that the Josh Marshall podcast is brought to you by Grady's Cold Brew Ice Coffee. You can get 25% off if you use the promo code TPM at Grady'sColdBrew.com. And that is, I think that's it for this week.
All right, we'll see you next week.
Later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.